The Florida Keys, a world-famous fishing and diving destination.
It's the third largest barrier reef in the world. It supports basically an annual economy of about $6 billion a year, but it also suffers from significant use from a regional population on the order of about 7 million people in the three-county South Florida area.
As Florida's population has increased, the health of its coral reefs, which form the foundation for the state's large fishing industry, has drastically declined. With it, so have fish populations.
Man loves to fish, catches too many fish, therefore the numbers go down.
To better understand how fish populations are doing, a team of scientists dives regularly to conduct a census of the fish that live on the reef.
The main reason that we're out here counting fish is really to try to get some better understanding of what's happening with these coral reef fish populations. And the best way to do that is to put divers in the water and actually have them go and count and size the stuff that they're seeing.
To collect this data in remote locations like the Dry Tortugas, scientists use a highly efficient and streamlined process.
Go divers, go.
It's kind of like a paramilitary assault on marine resources because we're doing on the order of 100 scientific dives a day. So the process of having a custom ship with a very skilled captain and crew with highly trained divers gives us great flexibility and latitude to sample large areas accurately and provide information really that nobody has been able to capture before.
What will the divers find? Are fish populations recovering in South Florida?
Major funding for this program was provided by the Batchelor Foundation, encouraging people to preserve and protect America's underwater resources.
Dry Tortugas National Park is one of the lesser-known jewels in the national park system. It is famous for its 19th century Fort Jefferson, a remote Union outpost located on an island 70 miles west of Key West. Most visitors come to the park on a day trip to see the fort, the thousands of birds that nest on a nearby island each spring, and to snorkel around the fort's moat walls. But only a few visitors get to see what makes up the vast majority of the park.
97% or more of this park is actually underwater. That's what we are out here to study.
The park's roughly 100 square miles of magnificent underwater resources make up the westernmost part of Florida's reef chain.
The living reef starts about Key Biscayne, which is about 30 miles north of Key Largo, and then runs at least to the Dry Tortugas, so about 270 kilometers southwest on the southwest Florida shelf.
The health of the reefs and the fish that live there has drastically declined over the last half-century. With more and more people arriving in South Florida, fishing pressures increased dramatically. In the early years, no data was collected on the fisheries. It wasn't until the late 1970s that scientists began to analyze how fish populations were doing. Now, each year, researchers from various organizations and agencies dive in to count the fish on the reefs.
What we're hoping more than anything is that this research will give us some understanding about how these resources are doing. When I say resources, in this case, I'm talking primarily about coral reef fish communities, particularly with an emphasis on the exploited species like snappers and groupers.
To cover as large of an area as possible in Dry Tortugas National Park, the highly skilled science divers have developed a unique method to collect their data. They spend 1 to 2 weeks at sea on a chartered liveaboard, making multiple dives each day.
Regular sport diving charter, we typically tie to buoys. We're moored, so the dive times are very regimented. With a group of divers like this, we dive all day long. We dive with 5 teams of divers rather than all the divers getting off the boat at one time and then getting back on the boat at one time. And we do that for a couple of different reasons. One is to get more dive sites in during the day, and the other one is that the divers can each see something different and they get more ability to count fish in different locations.
Captain Frank uses a commercial charting program to find the predetermined dive sites.
The scientists can give me a list of where they want to go, and they give that to me electronically. We insert it into the computer. It pops up what's called a waypoint on the screen, and then I can move the boat to the waypoint. I use the depth sounder to search around for something interesting near the waypoint, be it a ledge, coral reef, a pinnacle, something like that. We don't want to just drop them in sand. Sand isn't where we're going to find our fish. Team 5 against the wall, Team 5. Divers on the wall, please.
And it kind of works like a factory. Basically, we have 5 teams. Each team consists of 4 divers, so two buddy pairs. Captain Frank takes the boat to the GPS point.
Divers ready? Ready! Roger that. We have a pinnacle and 60 feet of water to the bottom, 40 feet of water to the top. Go divers, go.
Each buddy pair has a dive flag, and they descend to their site, and they tie off the flag.
And then they swim about 50 feet apart, and each of them imagines a circle with a radius of about 25 feet. So ideally, those circles will be touching just at the very edge. So they can still see each other, so if someone runs into problems, something happens, the other diver can offer some assistance. But they're far enough away that the circles do not overlap, so each sample then is independent.
So then once the divers are situated and they've figured out what their cylinders are, they start counting fish. It takes an experienced diver, takes a diver who can identify fish, and then what we do is we have this extensive training program that each fish diver goes through to standardize how they estimate the sizes of fish and whether or not they're able to count the numbers of fish. That sounds easy, like 1 fish, 2 fish, red fish, blue fish, not so much actually. Occasionally you have huge schools go through hundreds of fish, and you know, how many fish is that? You can't count each one, so you have to have a good eye of how to estimate abundances of fish.
We try to start with the most commercially important species, things like the big snappers and the big groupers. When we see them, we count them immediately and we estimate their sizes immediately, because in many cases they tend to be a little skittish towards divers and are more likely to swim off quickly. And so we want to capture those as immediately as we can, and then go through the rest of the species that we see in the area, usually starting with the bigger things that are left, moving down to the smaller species, because the smaller species are much less likely to swim away. Each diver takes down a measuring stick, which is called an all-purpose tool. It's sort of like a T-stick that's about 1 meter long, marked with 10-centimeter increments up the meter stick, and then the T part is about 30 centimeters across with a ruler that actually has centimeters on it so we can see. And what we use that stick for is to help us estimate the sizes of these individual fish, because size structure is very, very important. Large fish tend to be much older, and basically the number of babies that they make is much, much larger than smaller fish. And so knowing that there are 4 fish is important, but knowing that there are 4 big fish is much different than knowing that there are 4 small fish.
Also, when divers go in the water, they're not just collecting information about the fish, because the fish, aren't acting alone. They're responding to their environment. We're also collecting data about the habitat and the water quality. And we're looking at that data in relationship to any trends that we see in the fish populations to see whether or not it's actually something happening to the habitat that's changing the distribution of fishes that we see.
It's important because the coral reefs are actually the structures that allow the nurturing and raising of juvenile fishes, and allowing larger fishes to say hide from predators. You've probably heard of the integral web of life. Each thing has its place.
Once the divers are done counting, it's time to head back to the surface.
They meet at the center where their flag is. There's a GPS attached to the buoy itself at the surface, so we have the exact location of where those two counts occurred. And after that, they all come up together.
Roger, divers on the surface. We'll go pick them up.
And then the boat pulls around.
We're cover divers.
Picks them up and they get on board and do it all over again 5 or 6 times a day.
Lots of relief. No grouper. Again.
26 feet, 20 minutes, 2,400 pounds.
So it's kind of a cool process that we're just constantly dumping divers, picking them up, and within the course of a day we'll hit 25 sites, and that's 25 sites times 4 divers. So that's a whole lot of dives and a whole lot of hours underwater that we get by doing this kind of cruise.
When a team is back on the boat, they enter the data recorded on the dives.
The less glamorous side of marine biology involves entering and managing all of this data. So after we get out of the water, people need to come in, sit in front of the computers and enter their data, double check it to make sure that they've done it correctly. At the end of the trip, it'll go back to each individual agency. They will double check it again to make sure that the data's been entered correctly, and then it gets all collected and put in a central database where all the agencies have access to it.
Scientists from 4 different agencies and institutions are along on this particular trip to collect data. They work for the National Park Service, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, and the University of Miami Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Science.
One of the things that I first noticed about this particular group of divers is the cooperation level between different agencies, both federal and state, is very high. In other places that I've been, in other states that we've worked in, particularly along the Gulf Coast, it's very difficult to get all those agencies working together to make a mission like this gel like this particular mission does.
For many years, the various groups were counting fish independently, often duplicating their efforts.
So we got together and did a big meeting, compared kind of the data that we accumulated through the years, and decided that it will be more efficient to actually gather other forces and our crews and survey all together.
To streamline the process and make the surveys more efficient, a formal protocol was devised as a guideline.
Actually, creating the protocol document allowed us to really critically evaluate every single step of the actual method, from the training, from the statistical design, from the actual in-water taking of the data all the way to the proofing and data analysis. We want to be able to present a united front and have all of the agencies agree on what actually, the trends are.
There's a beauty in that process too. One is that we're now not doing different kinds of things and reporting different information. We're on the same page. Secondly, by adding this incremental effort in a team process, we're getting a more precise estimate over a broader range of areas.
We've been able to cover much more territory in a much more efficient manner so that we're getting the best snapshot of what's happening on the reef over time.
I'm really excited about this because it's turning out to be kind of the hallmark, if you will, of a way that a cooperative program can produce information that's relevant to scientific decision making, but also stands as a model not only in Florida, but Puerto Rico, the Papahānaumokuākea National Marine Monument, the Coral Reef Reserve in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands and throughout the Pacific. So it's very exciting and making a difference.
Alrighty guys, you guys ready? Hello? Team 4 ready? Roger that. Team 4 is ready. Diving a site called Jerry's Kids. Jerry's Kids, first discovered in 2002 by the Spree.
So how did the scientists know where to dive to count the fish?
We have a kind of a collaged habitat map for the whole Dry Tortugas National Park. It's broken up into little grid cells, 200 by 200 meters. each cell is classified as to a type of habitat. A lot of it is not reef, so that's just not sampled at all. So if it's sand or seagrass or something like that, we don't bother with it.
For this particular study, scientists are only interested in sampling coral reef habitats because this is where most of the fish can be found.
The strategy is to try to place samples strategically in high-density areas, much like if I were going to go sample the U.S. population. I wouldn't spend a lot of time in the Mojave Desert because there aren't many people, but I identify places like cities, New York, Chicago, Miami, Baltimore, etc., where those would be, because those are places I need to get more information from.
Scientists have categorized or stratified the reef into 8 different types of habitats they want to study.
There's, very complex spur and groove, 4 reef habitats, and then there's little patch reefs that occur.
Since it would be impossible to survey every single location within these vast reef habitats, a computer chooses random GPS points where the scientists will dive.
We run a random number generator routine to pick. So say, for instance, I have a habitat with 50 sites in it total, and I want 10 of them. From numbers 1 through 50, it'll pick 10 numbers. So then those get tagged onto that grid cell, and then we create the sampling map.
So the idea that by doing that is we're getting a fairly good estimate of fish abundance in each habitat throughout the entire region.
So we get an unbiased estimate of what's going on, which is extremely important for scientific credibility.
This approach to fisheries management is called fishery-independent sampling, because scientists evaluate living fish populations instead of counting the fisherman's catch.
Rather than going and counting fish on the dock, what we're doing is going in the water and counting what's left after the take. Historically, the focus was more on yield, meaning removal from the fisheries, as much as thinking forward about how do we sustain the resources. So more contemporaneous fishery management has thought critically about what we're leaving in the water rather than what we're taking out. We began to realize in most of the important fisheries that there were massive reproductive declines. Stocks were collapsing when in fact we thought they should sustain themselves.
Worldwide fisheries have declined drastically, with some estimates predicting that if business continues as usual, most major fish stocks will be depleted by 2048. Florida, too, has seen the numbers of its fish decline over the years.
To some extent, it's death by 1,000 cuts. The fishery has been very long-term. They've been catching reef fishes technically from the reef since Flagler's Railroad, which basically reached Key West, I think, in about 1912. It intensified significantly in the pre-war years, 1930 up through 1940. After 1950, it was Katy bar the door. Along with air conditioning and access to South Florida, the reef fishing was a very popular destination for a lot of folks. And so the take, if you will, has been significant.
Florida's population has increased exponentially since World War II.
We're about 20 million people in the state now. By 2020, we're talking about 40 million people.
And it's not just the commercial fishing industry that's putting pressure on marine stocks. In 2001, Floridians owned roughly 1 million registered recreational boats, most of which are outfitted with the latest technology to find fish.
I grew up in Miami and grew up fishing with my family since I was about 5 years old. And we used to go out on charter boats and we would come back with an incredible catch. Very diverse, very large fish, a couple of groupers, a couple of snappers, our freezer was always stocked. And over time, personally, as I look back on those photos, same charter boats, same locations, the fish tended to get smaller and much less diverse. So personally, within my lifetime, I've definitely seen the impact of fishing pressure on the resources here on the Keys.
The closer you are to population areas, of course, like Miami and the Keys, the declines have been more drastic than, say, out here, because this is a remote area. But across the board, it's declined.
And overfishing hasn't been the only cause for the decline in fish populations. Pollution, coastal development, and a number of other factors all have had a negative impact on Florida's reefs. In the 1990s, scientists made a disturbing discovery.
70% of the snapper grouper complex in the Florida coral reef ecosystem, population levels were below the size considered sustainable by state and federal mandate, and that sent a real shockwave through the system. That conclusion led to really a series of strong management actions that were required by law to try to repair the system, if you will. And they involved, of course, which were habitual over time, but size limits and bag limits, typical fishery controls.
The decline in numbers also contributed to the creation of marine protected areas along the Florida reef chain.
Marine protected areas give our resources a chance to rest, I think is the best way to describe it. They're free from fishing pressure, free from environmental pressure. It allows things to kind of grow without kind of these everyday kind of assaults on them. So I think given time, just about everything can recover. And so I think that's what our coral reefs really need, is time to recover, and a little bit of care from us on the land side to try and ensure that that can happen.
It's like the bank, you know, you're banking your fish, I guess. It takes time.
Today, there are several marine protected areas inside and around Dry Tortugas National Park. One of the major goals of the fish counts is to compare the size and abundance of fish populations inside and outside of those areas over time.
We would expect to see in places where you close an area to fishing, we'd expect to see higher numbers and larger individuals, particularly of the exploited species. In this case, those would be things like the snappers and groupers. There's also evidence from other places that suggests that even diversity can increase in these areas as well.
While most of the marine protected areas in the Dry Tortugas region are still relatively new, one area that was established in 2001 has already shown positive signs of recovery.
We would have expected a recovery with release of fishing mortality, but technically what we were expecting would take about a decade to get the response we expected. Surprisingly, in 2004, we saw recovery of a number of the important exploited reef fishes, snappers, groupers, black grouper, red grouper, button snapper, yellowtail snapper, etc. Abundance was going up, but also we were getting a higher number of mature fishes, which is the sure signal for the future to say that we're getting, if you will, that recharge of the system that in essence is ensuring long-term sustainability.
Protecting marine habitats from fishing pressures not only benefits the immediate area, but may also have spillover effects that help to repopulate regions that are still open to fishing.
Because of where Dry Tortugas sits relative to the rest of the Florida Keys, kind of at the very start of the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream is moving from here to the east and then up to the north around the rest of the Florida Keys. So there's a good deal of evidence that suggests that reproduction that occurs here in the Dry Tortugas actually will seed the rest of the Florida Keys. So in that sense, it could actually be a very, very important place for the rest of the Keys.
Surprisingly, the concept of marine protected areas is still a relatively new idea. Worldwide, only 0.8% of the oceans are protected from human pressures, even though the oceans cover 70% of this planet. Compare that to 12% of Earth's landmass that is protected in the form of national parks and preserves.
Marine spatial planning took a long time to kind of get off the ground. I think now it's, especially with results like what we're seeing here in the Tortugas, it's becoming a much more accepted tool for fisheries management. And so we're hoping that it can be used in the future. It'll be used to ensure that the resources are available for all of our children. I have a 3.5-year-old and I wanted to be able to go fishing and diving as much as I had a chance to do when I was a kid.
After 10 days at sea, the boat heads back to port in Key West. In their quest to better understand Florida's reef fish populations, the 25 scientists on board conducted a total of 858 dives on 238 dive sites, spending a cumulative 455 hours, or 19 days, underwater. All the data collected on this trip, and others like it, will give managers the tools to hopefully make better, more informed decisions about Florida's fisheries in the years to come, and to ensure gems like Dry Tortugas National Park will be around for future generations to enjoy.
This really is a beautiful place. This is in scientists' parks. This is in fishermen's park. This is people's park who live in Oklahoma. And if we don't preserve it, then in the future, we've really lost the point of making it a park. This is everyone's park.
Major funding for this program was provided by the Batchelor Foundation, encouraging people to preserve and protect America's underwater resources.